Good evening and welcome to this Monday edition of the Moriah Nightly News. We have returned from our vacation, and this is the first time that we have streamed on Facebook Live. I have no idea how any of this is going to turn out with the current setup here. If all else fails, the audio will work just fine, but that's what we're dealing with. But in any event, this is the Moriah Nightly News. And so, from the nation to Moriah, here are tonight's top stories. When we left for vacation the week before, the nation had been rededicated at the Rededicate 250 event on May 17th. That event took place at the National Mall, a significant event in the spiritual life of our country that was under criticism from certain segments of the U.S. population. I don't have to tell you which ones, but also from some unexpected groups like the Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberty, citing the separation of church and state. In that was coming from the Wall Street Journal's reporting on that issue. My personal opinion on that is when we have a free society and freedom of expression, that should include religious expression. And we are not like Europe, where places like France cannot wear cross, hijab, any kind of religious item in public is banned. And the Rededicate 250 event was not unlike anything else in our country's history. Many presidents, going as far back as George Washington and John Adams, proclaimed national days of prayer and fasting for our country. Abraham Lincoln did it during the Civil War. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who is often heralded as the great socialist champion or liberal champion by the left, also proclaimed a national day of prayer and fasting during the Second World War. So, all of that is to say that spirituality and faith has always been a part of public life in our country. And so that is not anything new. And probably the criticism of it is nothing new because people just don't want God in public life. And it's always, I will leave it at saying it's always interesting to me how people get offended by somebody they don't even think exists. That being said, there was also a report from the Wall Street Journal, as you forgive me for looking and just seeing, make sure I'm still live. It's hard when you have to be a producer and an anchor at the same time. The Wall Street Journal also noted the imprisonment of a Chinese pastor last week. That was Pastor Ezra Jin, if I'm getting his name correct or pronouncing that correctly. He is a pastor in China. Of course, I had reported before we left for vacation that the church in China had been on the rise, and his was no different and has been no different. He went from a church that began with 20 people and exploded to at least 1,500, probably more than that. That was 1,500 when President Xi came to power, so it probably exploded more than that. He got his doctorate at Fuller Theological Seminary and more or less came to know the Lord after the Tiananmen Square crackdowns and noted that the Christians were different than everybody else. And he used technology to grow his church in the midst of the Communist Party crackdowns on the Christian church there. That full article is in the Wall Street Journal. That was in the Wednesday edition last week, and I'm sure it's still out for anyone that wants to read that. And so, of course, we should be praying for the church there. As we noted before we left for the break, the amount of persecution in China has been great over the last recent decade or so, especially since President Xi came to power. But even with that, Christianity has been well on the rise. So, with that bit of persecution, the church grows because it cannot be stamped out. Moving to the Middle East, the Iran war is still in that ceasefire. Questions emerged over the weekend as to the quality of that agreement that the president was making, but he is still being held up, or the negotiating team is still being held up. The normal questions that we reported on or have been reporting on are more or less still the same. Not much has changed there. The big issue is the matter of nuclear material, what has been enriched, and whether or not Iran wants to hand that over. Questions of economic sanctions and the Strait of Hormuz all on the table. Literally just prior to coming on the air, there were talks of defensive strikes by the United States, and we will monitor that in the coming days. But of course, there was no time really to note any of that for the broadcast. That's just coming from my memory, as frail as it is, that did take place. Of note, last week also was President, I guess he's a president, Putin was meeting with Xi after Trump's meeting, a week after Trump's meeting, and there was no indication of any progress on that from the Wall Street Journal, so we will follow that as well and see what took place there. But it did happen. They did meet, and was interesting with what is going on with Cuba. As the Wall Street Journal noted, Cuba is being used by the Russians and the Chinese for spying purposes. So, for all of the questioning of why Trump is so interested in Cuba, or why the president is so interested in Cuba, it is due to the influence of China and Russia in that area, which is less than 100 miles off the coast of Florida. And what those two countries are doing is spying on U.S. military installations in Florida, U.S. Central Command having presence there. And so that is a national security problem that the president will probably deal with. Now, he is, according to reports, using the same playbook that he used with Venezuela, as Raul Castro was indicted on charges over our vacation period. And so we will see if the president does use military force of some kind there to topple the regime, although it seems like they're on the edge of collapse already. So that will be a development followed on the national front. Also of interest was Trump endorsed candidates gaining in the midterm elections, of course, noting that we are in an election cycle. And of note was anti-Israeli Republican Thomas Massie being voted out. And noteworthy that anyone that opposes Israel eventually gets fired. On the local level, of course, was the BESS meeting down in Ticonderoga, which Regrettably, I was not able to attend because I was already pre-planned and scheduled to be away. And yet I did have some folks down there to cover for me and take photos, which is why you saw the post on Facebook last Monday. We did obtain permission to use video for this broadcast, but I could not get it from Facebook over to my computer. And so I will recap what happened, both on my own reporting and what the Times of Tai put out this week, or the Sun if you prefer, but we all know its real name. So, on the BESS project, the town board after that meeting voted to unanimously pass the moratorium. That moratorium was passed. There was not one vote against it by the town board, and there was not one voice in favor of that project at the meeting. Many of the residents gave powerful testimonies, and again, the video is on Facebook for anyone that would like to see it. We did obtain permission to use it, but again, we couldn't get our tech issues sorted out in time for that to work. But noteworthy presentations included, for example, Essex County Hazmat Coordinator Joe Norton, who called the outlook grim in the case of a fire, noting that the cloud comes from that, or the fumes, it's a fume cloud, can travel for miles from that epicenter. We had noted that in our own reporting. And the Sun did note that Bobby Porter was the owner of that land and that he himself supported the moratorium on that as well. Now, there was also a question from a resident in the video over his role as fire commissioner in connection to the project, and that is what we are looking at this time. Questions also over the APA's involvement in the case, the Adirondack Park Agency, where their involvement is, why they have not gotten involved, agencies like the DEC. What I will tell you is we had obtained the public project summary and discovered that the Adirondack Park Agency has granted a special use permit for the project. So, meaning that they can bypass their own regulations if they see that it is a fit. That is an ongoing investigation on our end as far as our journalism capabilities will allow. So we are still looking into that to bring you the best information possible, but I can tell you that I have looked at it and seen the document that it was green lighted by the APA. I did call the APA, but of course with today being Memorial Day, they are out of the office, and so we likely will not get a call back at least by tomorrow, but hopefully by Wednesday we'll see if they return the call or if they choose to ignore it. Now, I have no doubt that when I spoke to Mr. O'Brien at the meeting, that there was not a direct correlation. He said there was no direct correlation in his statement to me, but the renewable energy push is across the board from the federal down through. From the federal level, as we mentioned last week or the week before with the Green New Deal that was passed in the Biden era, or the Green New Scam, because that's what it is actually shaping out to be. So whether you agree with the president or not, that appears to be the case here. But so many people do not know about the state on this, what New York State is doing through the ORES, that is the ORES, the Office of Renewable Energy Siting and Electric Transmission. This is a special bureaucratic agency that has been set up by our wonderful Queen Kathy Hochul of New York State in the governor's office to basically push through and greenlight all of these renewable energy projects, solar panels, BESS projects, lithium battery, anything to do with renewable energy. And they are permitted to bypass local authorities because of New York State's push to be anywhere from 70 to 100% renewable energy efficient, or basically to be 100% off fossil fuels by 2030. So I don't believe from some reports that this project is connected directly to them because of what it is and the amount of power that it generates. But they have been so powerful that they have given even the Amish problems with trying to take land from them, that the Amish have tried to sue them in other parts of New York State, which was a clip that we had put up on our page a couple of weeks ago. So anytime you're willing to give the Amish a problem, to me tells me that you are working for the devil directly. And that's all I will say on that, because I feel that's all I need to say on that, for that to be as strong language as possible. So moving along to more that happened when we were away in the region that has somewhat sad news to report. I'm still on that load of working with that. The Diocese of Ogdensburg, here locally, as I have no doubt that it was front page news in the Press Republican or any of the newspapers, has entered a $45 million sexual abuse settlement, and this was announced on May 19th. So this would have been announced last Tuesday. And this was an agreement between victims of sexual abuse and their lawyers. These are adults that were abused as children by priests, and this was connected to the Child Victims Act of 2019. The Diocese of Ogdensburg had filed for bankruptcy because of these cases and settlements in 2023, Chapter 11 bankruptcy, asset protection, all of that. And the sale of church properties, probably staff cuts, that's usually how the settlements are paid for by the diocese, or a victims fund gets set up, things like that. But that agreement was reached for $45 million. And this was coming through the National Catholic Register, that the Archdiocese of New York also had an $800 million, was also announced this month as well. And Bishop LaValle here in Ogdensburg, the Ogdensburg bishop, said that he prayed settlement would bring, quote, peace, healing to all survivors and to all the faithful whose hearts were broken by the gravely sinful conduct of church leaders. Now, this is, of course, a deeply personal topic for me, having been, as many of you know, in the seminary and not far removed from these issues personally, with priests doing things they should not do. What I will tell you is that the most of the cases here, if not all of them, were in the Diocese of Ogdensburg, took place from the 1950s to the 90s, decades prior. That as the Child Victims Act of 2019, it allowed for that statute of limitations to be opened up in that 1-year window. Internally, the church formulated its Dallas Charter in 2002. That's its colloquial name. probably has a longer name, that set forth stricter standards for I would say, the treatment of minors, how minors are upheld in the church, or not how they're upheld, but how priests interact with them, things like that, and how a case is handled or an allegation is handled if it arises. And all of the data that I have seen or looked at across several different sources has indicated that the cases of new abuse has gone down. What I don't believe it addressed adequately enough was the amount of adult abuse if someone in a seminary situation is looked at for potential abuse, grooming, or things of that nature. And there are, of course, other things like that with failure to a recourse of due process was also one of the criticisms, and that is also fair. I will say flat out that I do not want to criticize anyone who is actively exercising a fantastic ministry as a Catholic priest, or any of the phenomenal lay people who are in the Catholic Church, as there are many wonderful people, both priest and laity, in the church, and I myself would be one of those lay people. But I also do not want to neglect to comment on the outright mishandling of these things, both in the past and in the present. We've many of the statements from folks like Cardinal Dolan leave a lot to be desired, and sound very political. And so that's all I will say on that. I do believe that with as hideous as these actions are, that recourse to the Old Testament style sackcloth and ashes repentance style would be more suitable. Public proclaiming of Psalm 51 and things like that, rather than some of the tropes that we see claimed today. That's all I'm going to say on that, and I will leave it at that. And certainly, praying is not a bad thing, but also actions and repentance are needed as well. And finally, tonight, as we move ahead in the business spotlight, I know that I have, over the course of our history here, mentioned the work that Hunter Way Farm has done, but it really is the quintessential success story of small business and entrepreneurship right here in the Adirondacks and in Moriah. Taylor Sprague, of course, started the business, looks like in 2016, according to her Facebook page. I did not realize it had been that long ago, but it is 103 acres on, of course, many of you remember the Lang family, Hookie and Ursula, bringing out that vision of restoring it to its farmland glory and its original purpose with modern and sustainable agricultural practices and techniques, and being environmentally sound as well. Their gift shop is always open on Saturday, usually open on Saturday from 8 to noon. Sometimes I know that they close to restock, or if they take a vacation. But they are always online. They have many products online. Recently, she restored the fencing there for the goat pen or some of the other animals there. It looked like it was about an acre worth of fencing that many here in the community helped to support. And not only has the community supported her in that business, but also the business has given back to the community in helping Moriah and the whole region to grow socially, both following the isolation that COVID brought and repairing that probably far beyond than it ever was with the calendar of events that take place there year round. There is a full calendar of events that are up on Facebook. Their Junkers in June event is coming up, being the most recent on the closest one on the dock that we're closest to. But it is the Fright Fest in October that remains the most popular. So we want to wish them well and wish Taylor well. But of course, I say them because I know it's the entire Sprague family doing that over there. And in our Moriah focus here tonight, tomorrow, the Port Henry Fire Department will have that follow-up meeting to discuss the rebuilding or the building on that proposed fire department vote for a new firehouse. The meeting is tomorrow night, May 26th at 7 p.m. And the first was on May 12th. And if you remember, we had reported that about 2/3 of that money is from a grant obtained by Elise Stefanik, about $3.3 million. You're looking at $1.6 million on the local tax levy. And if you break down those numbers, crunch the numbers, you're looking on an assessment for a house of $100,000. You're looking at an increase of about $74 per 100,000, and it goes up depending on how much your house and property is assessed at. That, of course, is the fire district that encompasses the former district of, or what was the former district in the village of Port Henry. But the debate, as I have had stated, was over questions of resources and the best use of those resources. And the land, of course, we noted was on the old A&P property. That property was also used by New Way Linen after that. And so that will be, that's an interesting, not only an interesting piece of history, but I would also be curious as to any sort of chemical residue or anything like that in the soil there that could be left over from their use of that land during that period. But aside from that, the population numbers of the town of Moriah compared to other towns in the area that are comparable. This is the data from the 2020 census with, if you take even just looking at Ticonderoga, which has a population of, Ticonderoga has a population of 5,000 people, just over 5,000. Moriah was at around 4,800, give or take a couple. So Ticonderoga, having a little bit more than we do here, has only one fire department, and Moriah has 3. Now, that, of course, is probably because of our history. Most likely, I have not studied the history of the fire department extensively, but I do know that with, for example, before the combination of school districts, a lot of that had to do with our history with Republic Steel, the mining industry, things like that, our hamlet status, all of that factoring in. So I have given my opinion on that it is a debate worth having. And so I will be at the meeting tomorrow to cover that for those interested. And I do think that is a question worth raising of, could we consolidate the fire departments at this point in time with the activity slowing down as it has since the glory days of the 1950s. So that will be tomorrow, May 26th at 7 p.m. at the current firehouse on Church Street. That is 11 Church Street. If for some reason you have to put it in your GPS, I would hope not, but you're welcome to come up from Ticonderoga. I know that I sent some of the Moriah folks down there for the BESS meeting, so definitely welcome. Anyway, and finally tonight, on ending on a positive note and bringing to a conclusion a story that we had reported on a couple of weeks ago. That was, as you remember, that senior project that George Evans had done for the community at the VFW. If you remember, back about 2 weeks ago now, he had put on a free spaghetti dinner for the town of Moriah at the Mineville VFW. And not only was the goal to feed the town of Moriah, feed the community for free, but he also managed to raise, after expenses, if I can read my number correctly, about 570, I think that's a five, $75. But either way, he donated $286.50 each to both the Crown Point and Moriah food pantries, along with cases of Girl Scout cookies. And who doesn't love Girl Scout cookie? So that is just a very positive story to end our return broadcast on. So with all of the different things going on politically around town or around our region, it is always good to know that there are still good things going on. And I would again, of course, congratulate not only George, but all of the graduating seniors, both here in the town of Moriah and in Ticonderoga, Crown Point, Westport, I guess Elizabethtown, because Boquet Valley encompasses all of that. But to congratulate all of our graduating seniors here in our region as that approaches. So with that being said, that is the Moriah Nightly News for this Monday, Memorial Day edition, remembering, of course, all of those who have paid the ultimate sacrifice for our nation and giving thanks for them and our freedom on this night. Good night.